Chapter 5. Her Appointed's Decision. A gentle breeze blew continuously through the secluded mountain village. The leaves on the trees decorating the mountain's crevice danced in the wind. The red-painted, wooden wind chimes over the village roads softly clattered, and the straw on the rooftops swayed ceaselessly. It was a beautiful sight that Link had been staring at for some time. He hadn't moved from his spot on the balcony, waiting for the princess and her old advisor to finish whatever they had chosen to discuss during their first meeting in over 100 years. Though he was almost sure that he already knew the topic. It was simply impossible to expect any sort of reconstruction with what remained of the Kingdom of Hyrule, especially after such a long time. In fact, he wasn't surprised to hear the pain in Zelda's voice when she suddenly called out to him.
Link, will you come in here, please?
Link looked over his shoulder to see one of the doors of the elder's home cracked open. He could barely make out the familiar golden locks of hair and the shimmer of bright green eyes that wouldn't look directly into his own. The moment he nodded, she retreated into the building, closing the door behind her. After taking a brief moment to prepare himself, he pushed away from the balcony railing and opened the doors to the house. He stepped into the building, allowing the doors to close behind him. On the opposite end of the common room was the usual sight of the old Sheikah elder, sitting on top of her stack of 3 pillows on the elevated dais. Stationed on the pillows resting on the floor in front of the platform was Zelda. She was on her knees, and even from across the room, Link noted that she wouldn't bring herself to look up from the floorboards.
What are you doing, boy? Reenacting the moment you first stepped into this room almost a year ago when you awakened? Just because Zelda has returned doesn't mean our dynamic has changed. Now, come closer.
With another nod, Link stepped down the walkway through the pillows and stopped before the platform. He glanced down at the princess, yet she still refused to look up. Taking this as a sign, he met Impa's dark eyes again, prompting her to speak.
Link, thanks to your efforts, starting from the moment you stepped out of the Shrine of Resurrection, the Calamity Ganon has finally been sealed away after over 100 years of plaguing our lands. While I'm sure you know its evil influence still remains, this cannot be considered a failure, especially with who we now have sitting among us once more. Not only do I congratulate you for completing the mission given to you the moment you first acquired that sword on your back, I thank you for bringing Zelda back to us safely and releasing the spirits of those who lingered in this world for far longer than they should have, allowing them to finally rest.
It's rare to see you so formal, Impa.
And it's rare to see you so stiff, at least these days. Maybe 100 years ago, this side of you would have been more usual. But alas, that time has long passed. Which brings me to this. It is time that you made a choice.
A choice?
Yes. I'm sure you know better than any of us that the remaining population has no intention of rebuilding a kingdom they do not remember. They are content with their lives as they are now, and even if they were interested, the small numbers that remain would make rebuilding almost impossible. At least for now. Because of this, our princess has a claim to a throne that no longer exists. Thus, she has decided to relinquish her title altogether.
Frowning, he looked back down at Zelda with crestfallen eyes. The races, including their own, were scattered, and it was as Impa said. They were all content with governing themselves. He knew this would come to pass, yet hearing it could not stop the flood of emotions in his heart for the one kneeling beside him, even if he didn't allow them to show.
With this in mind, the status of your assignment cannot be ignored. By the order of King Rome Bosphoramus Hyrule, you were placed as Princess Zelda's appointed knight. With her foregoing her title and the mission given to you by the last king of Hyrule now complete, You have been relieved of your duty.
For the first time, Link looked taken aback. Even though two people remained near him, for a moment, it felt as though he were in the house alone. He hadn't expected to hear those words. It wasn't anything he'd ever considered. Only minutes after he woke up, from the moment he heard her voice in his head, and even from the scattered pieces of memory he had, one thing had always been clear. Princess Zelda was his reason to move forward. Even though there was certainly more added to his motivations as his adventure progressed, that was always at his core. As questions he'd never even considered began to form in his mind, he slowly glanced at the legendary sword on his back.
That sword still belongs to you. It does not act upon the will of the royal family, but the will of the goddess and its own judgment. If it chooses to stay with you, its master, then that is where it will stay.
Link's eyes lingered on the sword's hilt a moment longer before he turned his attention back to the woman still kneeling on the floor.
There are still monsters in Hyrule that...
And what you choose to do with that knowledge is your decision alone to make.
What would Zelda...
I believe you should take time to think about what you will do without being influenced by the past. Link, you must think of what you want to do, not what you believe you should do, or what you would be ordered to do. None of us, in good conscience, could make you do anything more than you've already done.
Link, as my final order as the Princess of Hyrule, I command you to do as she says. Please.
Even as she uttered those words, she still could not bring herself to lift her head. It felt as though time had stopped, yet it also seemed like it had started flowing faster than a galloping horse. Despite this, Link shifted after a few moments of hesitancy, facing Zelda directly. He placed his hand over his heart and bowed. Holding his pose for what felt like an eternity, he finally turned and left the building, just in time for the princess's tears to drop from her chin onto the floorboards she was studying.
Now, girl. He hasn't made any kind of decision yet.
I know, it's just... I'm so scared. I know it's the right thing to do, but... I want him around always, Impa. Especially after all we've been through. Always. And if he chooses to go off on his own, I don't know what I'll do.
Her sniffling echoed through the room as tears continued to flow down her cheeks. She struggled to hold herself together, but the thought alone was simply too much to bear. Suddenly, she felt a pair of thin, frail arms wrap around her head.
Impa.
I know it's hard, but you have to promise me that no matter what happens, you will find your own path as well. Can you do that?
After a reluctant pause, Zelda nodded. After a few minutes to allow her to collect herself, Impa backed away.
I'm sorry. I know I'm being selfish, but you're right. I can't force Link to stay by my side forever. I truly want him to be happy, and if that means he chooses to travel alone, then so be it. I'm okay now.
Are you sure?
I am, or at least I will be. By Hylia, I'm acting like a child. As you said, we don't know what he's going to do, and here I am, bawling like a baby.
Well, for someone who feels the way you do, I'd say it's a normal reaction.
I suppose so. Thank you, Impa.
Of course. Now, let's get you out of that dress. That thing is filthy.
I would love to, but I don't have any extra clothing. Everything in the castle was destroyed.
Almost everything.
Confused, Zelda curiously watched as the short woman walked toward one of the wall shelves and began searching through bins and stacks of folded clothes.
What do you mean by almost everything? What are you looking for?
Link's tunic wasn't the only set of clothes I was able to preserve.
After another moment of wrestling, her old hands finally located a set of neatly folded clothing. In contrast to the dark navy and pale tan colors the Sheikah wore, this set of clothes was a bright white and blue, decorated with beautiful gold threading. Zelda's eyes filled with surprise as Impa hobbled back over to her.
Impa, you recovered and kept these? But how?
I went back and recovered them from the castle shortly after you locked the Calamity and yourself away in that tower. I'm sure the only reason they survived was because of how well they were made. You were always gifted at sewing.
Impa? That must have been dangerous. I can't believe you went there. You... Thank you.
Anytime. Now run upstairs and get changed.
Oh, it fits perfectly, just as it did back then.
Zelda smiled, now looking down at her clean fabrics, happy to be free of the soiled prayer dress. The clothing she'd changed into was a much-loved outfit she'd often sported 100 years ago, crafted specifically for travel and adventure. Along with the white and blue top, she wore a pair of form-fitting trousers with leather boots and gloves to complete the set. Out of all the clothes she had before, this was certainly one of the most comfortable and was thus her personal favorite. It also went very well with her favorite hairstyle, which was her hair hanging freely with the exception of a braided crown. It was the hairstyle she currently wore. Observing Zelda as she looked down at herself, Impa laughed.
It fits so well because you haven't changed either. A luxury I wish I could have.
I thought you did for a moment. Paya looks a lot, if not exactly, like you did back then. It was hard for me to accept how old you are, but to think you have a granddaughter, it doesn't feel real to me.
Sometimes it doesn't seem real to me either. But it has been 100 years. Things change, and life goes on, no matter what regrets may linger in one's mind.
Do you have regrets, Impa?
Many. Most from before and during the Calamity, but still many more after. One learns to live with them after so long. Now, I just wish to do what I can to support you and my granddaughter, because time is not always on our side.
It isn't, is it?
Do you remember your imprisonment these last 100 years?
I do, but I don't at the same time. Whenever I think about it, it's as if my mind goes into a fog. I feel as though I knew everything, and yet now I feel as if though I know nothing at all. But the first feeling lingers, in a way. I'm sorry. I guess it's not that straightforward.
I see. To be honest, it was a selfish question of mine that I was reluctant to ask. But the answer has brought me just a bit of peace, if I'm being honest.
I'm glad. Link asked me a similar thing this morning.
She glanced over at the double doors Link had walked out of earlier. Nervously, she looked down at her knees before clearing her throat.
But when do you think he'll return?
When Impa didn't respond, Zelda frowned.
Oh, you... don't think he'll come back?
It's not that I don't think he won't. He just doesn't have to.
Right. He doesn't.
Sadly, she brought her knees together and wrapped her arms around them before resting her chin on top. After a moment of silence, Impa spoke up once more.
Why don't you go and find Paya? You can help her with the shopping.
The shopping?
Evening is upon us, and dinner needs to be prepared soon. If you're to live as normal of a life as you can from here on out, then you had better get started. Now, listen to your elder and run along, girl. We can't have dinner too late in the evening.
Oh, okay.
With a nod, Zelda stood and dusted herself off before hurrying out of the doors. Impa chuckled.
It's amazing how such a stubborn girl can be so obedient at times.
As the old woman relaxed on her stack of pillows, outside the home, Zelda was hurrying down the large staircase. The moment her boots touched the grass, she quickly spotted the young Sheikah woman nearby. Just as before, she was hunched over on her knees with the same rag from earlier in hand, except this time, instead of wiping down floorboards, she was wiping down one of 5 large toad statues positioned in front of the pond beside the staircase. Remembering how startled she had been earlier, Zelda quietly took a step forward and gently called her name.
Paya?
Though it was much less exaggerated than before, the Sheikah woman still jolted. She looked around before settling her eyes on the Hylian standing a few feet away from her. Despite being a much calmer outburst, her face still looked surprised.
Princess Zelda! What can I do for you?
You don't need to call me by that title anymore. I don't have a claim to a throne that doesn't exist anymore. Please, just Zelda is fine.
I'm sorry. Then, Zelda, what do you need from me?
Your grandmother actually sent me to find you. She wants dinner to start being prepared, and she asked me to help you with the shopping.
Oh!
Paya exclaimed as she suddenly sprang to her feet, something that caught Zelda by surprise.
Is it that time already? I didn't mean to go shopping so late. I got a little distracted.
Distracted? By what, if I may ask?
The moment she asked this, Paya's face burst into a red glow. Trying to hide it, she brought her hands up to her face.
Nothing. I implore you not to worry about it. Please. Then we should be on our way. Though I can handle this by myself if you'd like. You don't need to come along.
No, I'll come along. Impa sent me so I could start learning to be an ordinary person. So, I might as well heed her words.
If my grandmother says so, then okay.
With a nod, the two began to walk down the path toward the general store, yet Zelda couldn't help but pause and look back. Epona, whom Link had left standing in front of the large staircase, was nowhere to be seen. She stared at the spot before calling out to her shopping partner.
Paya? Did you see Link leave?
I did, but he didn't tell me where he was going. He simply said he needed to think something over. I'm sorry if that wasn't the answer you were looking for. If I had to be honest, he seemed a bit lost.
I see. I'm sorry for asking such a random question. Let us be off.
As they continued toward the store, Zelda mentally berated herself. She had known Link had left. She knew Epona wasn't there in front of the stairs. She knew, and yet she still asked something that would only hurt her. For the rest of the evening, she continued to put on her facade of being okay, with the thought of her knight constantly in the back of her mind. It wasn't until after dinner had been cooked and eaten that she was able to find a moment to herself. By the time the moon had risen high above the mountains, Zelda was sitting at the top of the tall staircase. While she loved every second she had been with Impa and her granddaughter, it wasn't enough to overpower the sense of loss she currently felt in her chest. The moment Paya offered to handle the dishes, the erstwhile princess took that opportunity to slip outside, hoping that the evening view would be enough to take her mind off the pain. While the village was relatively quiet during the day, with the stars now glittering above, it was so silent that the rushing water of the falls behind the elder's home echoed through the mountain peaks. Though still dark, lanterns had been illuminated throughout the village, giving the place a warm, peaceful aura. It wasn't long before specks of flickering green and yellow lights started appearing through the city streets as fireflies floated in peace, adding a bit of ambiance to the village. Everything was beautiful, but it wasn't enough to clear Zelda's mind. With her chin on her knees and her arms wrapped around her legs, she gazed out into the village's beauty with glassy green eyes. It wasn't until the front doors of the elder's house opened behind her that she was snapped out of her brooding thoughts. Zelda twisted around to see Paya standing timidly in the doorway.
Zelda, my grandmother said that you are to sleep here tonight. Whatever you plan to do next can wait until morning. We have a bed upstairs that you can borrow.
But isn't it just the two of you here? That would mean I'd be taking one of your beds. Impa is elderly now, and you never knew me as royalty. I couldn't possibly allow you to accommodate me in such a way.
Well, to be honest, though my grandmother will say that she stays up all night, the truth is, she tends to fall asleep on her pillows. She just won't admit that. So, the bed you would have is usually free regardless. Plus, she isn't really giving you much choice.
Oh.
She had always known Impa to be a bit forceful, even back then, but this older version of her was much more demanding. She was sure the elder would behave this way regardless of whether she kept her title.
Then, I guess I don't have much of an option but to accept, do I?
Not really, no. The bed is already made if you wish to sleep now.
Thank you, but I think I'll wait to sleep for just a little bit longer. You needn't wait up with me.
I'll be up for quite a while longer, actually. I have a bit more cleaning to do, and then I'd like to do a bit of writing late at night.
Oh, that's nice. I won't keep you from your duties then.
Silence stretched between the two women, and despite being told that she wouldn't be kept, Paya remained standing in the doorway. After a few moments, she stepped onto the balcony and gently closed the door behind her. Hesitantly, she came forward and sat on the top step with her Hylian guest.
Are you waiting for him?
Zelda didn't respond, and if it weren't for the slight twitch of her ears, Paya wouldn't have known if she had heard her at all. Gathering her confidence, she decided to ask one more question.
Zelda? Do you have feelings for him?
Zelda curled herself into a tighter ball, refusing to take her eyes off the village lights. Paya didn't press any further and, in fact, blushed furiously with the last question she had asked. It was clear that she wasn't going to get a response, and she couldn't help but feel guilty over such a selfishly motivated question. Mimicking Zelda's actions, Paya faced forward to look out over the view, yet the moment she did, she gave a small yelp.
Ah!
Instead of orange village lights in the distance, she found a slow, flickering ball of green light in front of her nose.
It was just a firefly. I'm sorry if I startled you, Zelda. I just...
She stopped. The firefly had flown over to Zelda, illuminating her eyes. She could only see them for a split second before the bug flew away, yet that brief glimpse was all she needed. With a saddened frown, Paya looked down at her feet.
If your feelings are strong enough, then I'm sure he'll come back for you. I'm sure of it.
With that, she quietly stood and slowly walked back toward the door. Just as she pressed her palm to the handle, her ears twitched.
Thank you.
Without looking back, Paya nodded before entering the house. Not long after she went in, Zelda got up and followed suit. She quietly stepped into the home, and it was just as Paya had said. Though she wasn't quite asleep just yet, it was clear the elder was looking a bit tired as she sat on top of her pillows. With a tiny smile, she quietly crept through the room before reaching the staircase.
Good night, Impa.
After receiving a nod from the elder in good night, she headed up to the second level, where she found Paya sitting on a pillow at her desk. Though she didn't yelp, Paya still seemed a bit surprised when she heard the quiet steps of Zelda entering the room.
Are you still writing?
Paya nodded vigorously, her cheeks practically glowing red.
I see. Sorry to interrupt you, but... which bed should I use?
Oh, that one just in front of you is my grandmother's. Please, rest well.
Thank you.
With a shaky nod, Paya turned back to her desk, though instead of resuming her writing, she set her quill down and placed her face into her palms. Zelda's face fell, disheartened. The Sheikah still couldn't seem to look her in the eyes. With a quiet, deep breath to herself, she moved over to the bed and sat on the edge. After removing her boots, she lay down, focusing her gaze on the wooden beams decorating the ceiling. After a moment, she looked over at the nightstand beside the bed, upon which the prayer dress rested, neatly folded but still filthy. Eventually, her eyes began to close as all thoughts concerning Link's disappearance, her father's journal, the castle, and everything else began to fade into darkness.
Are you sure you want to leave now? You were only released from your self-imprisonment a few days ago, yes? Maybe you should take a bit more time to rest.
I'll be fine, Paya.
With a sigh, she looked up at the circular window near the top of the pointed ceiling. Rays of morning light were shining through, making every floating dust mote visible.
It's only a day's journey to Hateno village. It shouldn't be too demanding of a trip for me. Besides, I felt surprisingly healthy ever since being released. It was Link who had sustained a serious amount of injuries.
Without realizing it, her face had fallen as she watched the floating dust dance between the sun's rays. After a brief moment in her thoughts, she stood.
Well, I'd best be on my way. I have a long day ahead of me.
Yes, thank you for staying with us. Please return sometime soon. I'm sure Grandmother would be pleased to see you doing well.
Of course, and thank you for the meal last night, Paya. I hope that we can be friends in the future.
Huh? With me? I'm nothing special.
Well, neither am I. Even with my title, I wasn't much. Just a girl who liked learning interesting things. I don't even have my power anymore. I'll see you again.
Yes. Again.
After a small wave, Zelda moved and disappeared down the stairs, leaving her alone.
You say you aren't special, but if you truly weren't, then maybe I'd feel as though I still had a chance.
As Paya pondered these thoughts, Zelda reached the common room. She looked over to where the stack of pillows was stationed, and sure enough, Impa remained seated on top of them. Zelda was impressed that the old woman could sleep with such balance without any fear of falling.
Good morning, Zelda. Ready to begin your journey?
I am. I hope you don't mind me leaving so early.
Not at all. I assumed you'd leave soon. You have much ahead of you. I see you don't have your prayer dress in your arms.
Well, Link took the Sheikah slate, and if I'm being honest, I don't much care for it.
I'll keep it for memory's sake, in case you ever get sentimental.
I doubt I will, but thank you. I guess I'd better be off now. Impa,
Yes, girl?
I'm sure Link will eventually come to find me. You know, some of my stuff is in the Sheikah slate and all. And, like you said, it's unlikely that he would just never come to see me and...
Get to the point.
Can you tell Link where he can find me? He's always welcome to stop by. You know, wherever I end up settling down or where I'm travelling to. Whatever the case may be, he can always come join me.
You want me to pass that message along? I can if that is what you wish, but I'm sure you won't need me to.
What do you mean by that? I'm sure that if he needed to find me, then he would come to the last place that I was, which is...
Suddenly, she stopped. She had noticed the look in Impa's eyes, and after a few moments of silence, her emerald eyes filled with shock. As realization dawned on her, the elder began to chuckle.
He came earlier this morning, but didn't want to wake you.
Where is he now?
Probably near the entrance of the village, preparing to leave. He didn't tell me what he decided to do with himself, so he must be waiting to catch you.
Before she could finish, Zelda had already turned on her heel and began hurrying to the door.
Thank you, Impa. I'll visit again soon, I promise. Goodbye.
After that, the doors closed behind her. Impa chuckled to herself.
You'd better take care of her, Link. And Zelda, try not to be too difficult.
Suddenly, another girl appeared from upstairs. Impa glanced over to see her granddaughter standing at the landing.
Good morning, my dear. Is everything all right?
Grandmother, the princess truly loves him, doesn't she?
Well, she may not say it out loud. It's clear that she does.
I guess the song Master Link heard before was true. And what of Master Link's feelings?
That isn't clear. He was incredibly hard to read back then, and the more memories were returned to him during his adventure, the more he reverted to that unreadable state. While he will never be the same as he once was, what remains, what was, and what is destined to grow within him is a mystery.
I see. It's time for my morning prayer, if you'll excuse me.
Slowly, she began to walk toward the front doors.
You ask as though you know something.
At the sound of this, Paya stopped in her tracks. After a moment of silence without turning back, Paya quietly responded.
They have the same look in their eyes, so even if he doesn't realize it, I'm sure that he... well...
With that, Paya disappeared out of the house, leaving the elder alone to ponder.
I see. If your intuition is correct, then I'm sorry, dear Paya.
As grandmother and granddaughter began their day in the usual manner, though with a somewhat melancholy air about the younger Sheikah, Zelda sprinted through Kakariko village. She ran past the simplistic houses and over the small bridges spanning the shallow creek, disregarding any of the Sheikah residents who waved at her. Her breath became labored, and the winding turns of the path caused her to stumble several times. Despite this, she maintained full speed, finally reaching the pathway that cut through the mountains, the same one she and her knight had used to enter the village. There, standing under the decorative arch at the entrance to the village with his chestnut, white-maned horse, was Link. He was currently holding out an apple for Epona to take, but the sound of Zelda's labored breathing alerted him to her arrival, and he turned his head to see her standing just a few feet away from him.
Zelda, good morning. I hope you were able to rest well. I'm glad you could sleep in a bed for the night.
I thought you had left. I thought you might not return.
Link seemed taken aback.
I had to come back. I haven't given you an answer yet.
Zelda's heart began to race again, each beat echoing in her ears.
Well, what answer do you have for me?
Well, originally, I would have just said I'll stay as your knight, but honestly, what you and Impa said resonated with me. I never considered what life would be like after the calamity had been sealed. I always thought I would just be your knight without realizing that there were other options. That was something I really needed to think about, and properly.
And did you?
I did. I went riding all last night to clear my head and really think. And I've decided. I want to stay with you.
What? You want to remain my knight? But Link, I'm not a princess anymore. You can't...
I didn't say I wanted to stay your knight.
But... why? Why stay with me?
I, said it yesterday, and I was speaking the truth. You're a really important friend of mine, one I don't believe I can stay away from for too long. So I'm telling you that I want to stay with you.
You spent the whole night away. And that's what you end up telling me?
She began to step towards him, and Link closed his eyes, prepared to accept whatever punishment she would give him for disappearing as such. What he didn't expect was for her to wrap her arms tightly around his torso. His eyes shot open the moment he felt her body against his, though he managed to keep the rest of his reactions under control.
Are you certain? I'm sure I won't be easy to deal with. You're so used to this world, and I'm so inexperienced.
She could feel Link nod.
Yes, I am. Besides, I couldn't leave you alone out there with monsters still running around. I wouldn't be able to live with myself.
You didn't have to prove my point, but you're right. And it'll be nice to investigate why the monsters are still around with you by my side. Then, if this is really what you want to do, will you promise me something?
What is it, Zelda?
Please. Never disappear for that long without saying something ever again. At least say you'll be gone a while. Please.
Yeah. Sorry.
After a few moments of suppressing the urge to cry, Zelda released her grip on him and took a step back, a faint blush on her cheeks. Attempting to disguise his awkwardness, Link turned to prepare the saddle for two.
So, where do we go now? Impa said I should possibly go to Hiteno to try to get to know the remaining Hylians, but I know you said we may have a place that we could rest at.
I do, and it's actually in Hiteno village. It's where I bought a house, and Puro's there too.
You bought a house?
Fighting monsters doesn't bring in a lot of rupees, but I have my ways.
With a tiny smile, he turned and climbed onto the mare's saddle. Once secured, he stretched his hand down to her.
Would you like to see it?
After a pause, she smiled and placed her hand into his.
I'd love to. Thank you for listening to this installment of the Couple of the Wild audio play. Let us know what your favourite part of this chapter was in the comments, and if you enjoyed, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you can be updated with future releases. If you want to read ahead in the story, check the link in the description below, and if you want more Zelda dubbed content, check out the rest of the channel.
I didn't say I want to stay your night, bitch.